Oh, sometimes sound systems are great. Other times they make you feel like, who is that talking? Let me pray and we'll get started. Thank you, Father, for these good people who have chosen to a portion of their afternoon to spend this time learning how to be better managers of the things that you have given them. Bless us as we spend this time together now, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. Going to start off with these basic principles of stewardship. Did it work? Look at that. Work for... now you'll notice that I'm not going to go and I'm not going to read all of these texts, but they're provided so that you can look at them yourself. All of these are biblical principles. I didn't make this stuff up. And the problem we find, we've become a society of consumers rather than a society of makers and doers. And that is contrary to what the scriptures teach. So start off with work for a living. It's an expectation. Now, obviously, and we were talking about this, the one with the last one, don't expect others to support you. There's a period where you have to grow up to the place where you can support yourself and work for a living, an honest day's work for an honest day's wage. I presented this in one place and somebody stopped me and said, my boss should pay me more. I said, well, I don't know that, but why do you say that? Well, because I don't make enough to not live in my mom's basement. I said, well, now you've raised an interesting dilemma. Why are you working for a job that doesn't provide you the income for you to live on your own? Well, I like this job. Well, if you like it, but it's not enough to pay your way, you've decided to settle for that. So why should your boss pay you more? Is it a skilled position? He was loading trucks. I said, oh, you're fortunate to have a job. You know that they use robots to do that now. He said, well, not this guy. He wouldn't pay for a robot. I said, if he does a cost analysis, he may very well decide you're not worth it, and a robot is. So be careful what you ask for in terms of your wages. An honest day's work for an honest day's pay. He is probably paying as much as your job is worth. Because he has to have people who will show up every day. That's a whole nother part of this. Don't expect others to support you. See, and he had a problem with those two in conflict. I said, there are two basic solutions to your dilemma. Make more money. That may mean a second job. I don't think your boss is going to pay you more because of the kind of job you have. Or reduce your expenses. What are your expenses? I'm paying off student loans. Did you finish your degree? No. Somehow our society has tricked us into thinking that you have to go to college, you have to take out loans, and people are graduating from college with massive debt. And that's a whole nother thing here. Avoid debt, see the third one, or get out of debt as soon as possible. Student loan debt. So now we insist that the government pay. Isn't that the last one? See how we're living in conflict with all these principles? And these are basic principles of life from the scriptures in terms of financial stewardship. The scriptures say that you are a slave to the person that you borrow money from. Who wants to be a slave? Then don't go in debt. A number of years ago, Steve Martin, back when he was a funny comedian, when he was on Saturday Night Live, did a skit that he wrote a book. He's the author, and he's promoting this book, and here's this family that bought this book, a husband and wife, and the title of the book is, If You Don't Have the Cash, Don't Buy It. How about that for a crazy idea? Well, then this couple is sitting at the table, and they open up the book, and the word on the first page is the same as it is on the title of the book. If you don't have the cash, don't buy it. It's that simple. So the husband says to the wife, does that mean if we don't have the cash, but we really want it, we should just borrow the money? And he steps into the room. No, if you don't have the cash, don't buy it. And he goes through all these different scenarios where they try to figure out ways to buy things without cash, without credit. They want to go in debt. And if you don't have the cash, don't buy it. It's a real simple principle. Most of us don't live by it. That's why we are having problems that we're having. Save and invest, avoid debt. There are all these good things that are in here. Be content. Don't hoard, but don't waste. Do you know that one of the fastest growing segments of the construction industry is in storage lockers? Storage lockers. Buildings that you rent to put your stuff in because you don't want to have it in your house. Right. But you pay rent on more square foot to put the stuff you don't want to look at that you own. Right? That makes a lot of sense, right? Why not just get rid of it instead of paying to keep it? Because we become hoarders. There's shows about those people who don't invest in a storage locker but just hoard it in their house. Then you have the people who rent the storage locker, shove all kinds of stuff in it, pay for it for a while, and then stop paying for it. Lots of reasons for that. And then they make a TV show out of auctioning off the storage lockers. Right? Storage wars. You've heard it or seen it. Hoping that people put something good in there. And most of the time, they barely break even on the purchase of those lockers. They might come out a couple of $100 a head, but it's a hard way to make a living selling somebody else's junk. And mainly what they find in them is somebody else's junk. But that's not saving. And it's a bad investment because you're spending money to take care of stuff that you don't want to use. Tell me how that makes sense. You see the problem here? Because we don't follow these principles, how can we be content? Save and invest. Do you know the value of, you might have heard the quote, and many people attribute it to Einstein. The most amazing thing about mathematics is compound interest. The one thing that he was just amazed by, how compound interest works. Two brothers graduate from college, same year. One starts saving with his first paycheck. The second doesn't start saving for 10 years. Actually puts more away each paycheck. When they get to retirement age, the brother who started saving with his first paycheck has $250,000 more saved than the brother who started 10 years later and put more away. Why? Compound interest for those 10 years makes that big a difference. That's why it's so important to save. That's why it's so important to invest. These are principles when we're being stewards of what God has entrusted to us that will not only provide for us, remember what we talked about this morning in the sermon, to preserve and protect and to use the things that we have for God's glory, for our own benefit, for our family's benefit, but also to glorify God. So these principles are the biblical principles of financial stewardship, the way that God expects us to manage our stuff. But it's not only our stuff, it's our people in our lives. It's ourselves. Respect others, respect yourself, care for others. You know, he specifically cites in the parable of the sheep and the goats, caring for the widows and the orphans, the disabled and disadvantaged, and the prisoners. Those are the people that we're supposed to be taking care of. This is a biblical principle of a relationship. Be humble. Don't think more highly of yourselves than you ought. Oh boy. You know, that they sell the giant foam fingers, right? We're number one. And it's all about being number one. How that violates this very essential principle. Moses was called the most humble of men. Jesus, humble, meek, and yet he was the king of the universe. Be peaceful and a peacemaker. You want to have good relationships. Have you read the Birth Order book? Birth order book, okay, talks about the characteristics of people based on their birth order. Typically, firstborn sons are alpha males, right? They're go-getters. By the way, if the second child in the family is a girl and the firstborn is a boy, the firstborn girl, who's the second in the birth order, she tends to have the same kind of personality characteristics as the firstborn son. And so you have this intense competition between those two. Talk about sibling rivalry. If you have 3 children, the middle child tends to be the peacemaker because parents tend to prefer the firstborn, and by the time the third one comes along, well, they don't get quite the same amount of attention. And so the third is trying to compete for the attention, causing problems, and the one in the middle tries to keep everybody at peace. I know this from personal experience. I grew up in a little family of 7 children, 3 older kids, 3 younger kids, and this is the order: son, daughter, son, me, son, daughter, son. So it was like a chiastic structure in our family. But I was very much the peacemaker, always trying to balance the family out. And many times, and my mom would deny it to her dying day, but my parents, when they were talking about their children, would talk about the 3 older ones and the 3 younger ones. Yeah, which caused me to act out in inappropriate ways. Not very good. But that's the reality. But I was a peacemaker. But Jesus values the peacemakers. It's one of the Beatitudes. Very important that we understand that in relationships, we don't live just for ourselves. So we want to be at peace with others. And that's where the forgiveness comes in. Forgive as you've been forgiven. Give generously of your time and talents and treasures. If you are doing those first principles about saving and investing and not being in debt, you have so that you are able to give. And it is a life of service. And that's the concept. Basically, you can conceive of the great controversy as the principles of self-centeredness versus service. Love for others or love for self. God and Satan. So you can get the picture. And that's why these biblical principles are so important. Keep and tend the earth. That's under relational. Because if you're trashing the earth, you're making it worse for somebody else. And that's why it's a relational principle. And so, the famous motto, reduce, reuse, recycle. We're catching on to that more. Are we doing a real good job of it? Well, fortunately, we live in an affluent enough society that we do it a lot better than any. Do we do it perfectly? No, nobody does. But individually, as we take hold of it, we are doing our part as stewards. And then there's physical stewardship. Let's see if I can make that. Hey, it worked. You all know about New Start, right? Okay, that's what that is. It comes from Weimar out in California. Creation Health, Florida Hospital. Same principles. Those are the biblical principles of physical stewardship. Good nutrition, proper exercise, enough water, enough sunlight, temperance or moderation. Now, some people take that to, moderation in all things. No, there's some things that you shouldn't even be indulged in. So that is where temperance comes in. You have to temper your behavior and your desires, and that's what that's talking about. It isn't just, you can do bad things moderately, okay? So that understanding that, you'd have to have good fresh air. You need to rest properly. I was talking about a book that I'm reading over lunch, Rest. Fascinating thing. Here's something that ministerial director I always struggled with our pastors with. That was both true in Carolina and in this conference. I would encourage pastors to take their vacation days. Pastors are notorious for not taking their vacation days. And we can only save up so many of them. And then once you reach the limit, that's all you get. And there are years of service required to get to. But here's the point. A pastor who doesn't take vacation days burns out. I think that's true on any job. I'm speaking from my experience of working with the church for 35 years. Pastors don't tend to use all their vacation days. I found out something interesting in encouraging them to take vacation. First principle is that don't waste your vacation days on taking long weekends. There is no physiological benefit, there is no psychological benefit from a long weekend. The stress isn't lowered, your heart rate isn't lowered, your blood pressure isn't lowered from a long weekend. Even if you take both Friday and Monday, that's almost a whole week off, right? 4 whole days, not just 2. Nope, doesn't work. Minimum time off that is required to have any benefit from a vacation is a full week. And then what happens is, okay, you leave the work week Friday, Saturday and Sunday are off, but all you're doing is thinking about work. Monday, your blood pressure and your stress level begins to decline. This has all been studied. It goes down a little more on Tuesday. Wednesday, it's in the normal range. You know what happens Thursday? You start thinking about all the work that you're going back to. And so blood pressure goes up, stress level goes up, and it continues to go up. You get back to your desk and almost explode looking at all the work that you have accumulated over your break. But you got 1 full day by taking a week off. Boy, it seems like there should be a better payoff than that, doesn't it? There is a better payoff. That's a 2-week vacation. And it isn't just 2 days, it's 4. That's how much a 2-week vacation does for you. More recent studies took that study and expanded on it. And they said, well, if that works, how long does that effect last? They found that people who took their full month of vacation, which is what a pastor who has achieved all that he can get, 4 weeks of vacation in a year. If he takes it all at once, it's good for 3 months. And then he's worse off than he was before he went on vacation. That's terrible. You know why he's worse off? Well, because he's thinking of, I don't get another break for 9 months. That's the problem. To compound it, they found that if you took that and did 3 months and a week, 3 months and a week, 3 months and a week, if you do that, 3 months and a week. Yeah, then 3 months and a week. Basically every quarter, you take a week off, you've used up your vacation, but you are less stressed, have better blood pressure, and you are more creative. And you are more able to handle the stresses that come. That's a biblical principle. God designed us to have a certain amount of rest every day and a certain amount of rest every week. And if you look at the feasts, the way they're stretched out through the year, God planned it for the Israelites to have 3 breaks every year, a week at a time. Interesting. How did he know that? There it is for you. And that's why we get to trust in God. It's essential. It's interesting that back in the late 50s, early 60s, when the church started the 5-day plan to quit smoking, it was incredibly successful. Great success. We were able to help people quit smoking in 5 days. And about 80% were successful. That's huge. The American Cancer Society thought that was great, and so they took it over and they got rid of the trust in God aspect of the 5-day plan. And they struggled to have 20% be successful. Well, in the meantime, other additional studies were done and they found that, and we changed our plan. We still have the 5-day emphasis at the beginning, but then we build in a buddy system that covers a whole month, because we found that you can break the habit in 5 days, but to keep it broken and establish a new habit takes a minimum of a month, and you can't do it. And so the buddy system was put into the Breathe Free plan, and that's that is a much more successful. We still have, with our free plan, a higher success rate than the program, because the main difference is, while they have stolen the rest of the program from us, they've knocked God out of it. And by knocking God out of the program, the programs that they run are not as effective or as enduring as the results of our Stop Smoking programs. So that's why trust in God is one of these relational principles. It's taking care of yourself, and it's taking care of others as well. So then we need to talk about money. You know it was going to come to this. Fascinating things. Here's what the Bible teaches. Leave them for the poor and the foreigner. See, it's not just about what we get out of our work. It's what we are able to provide for others. A tithe of everything belongs to the Lord. It's holy to the Lord. That's an important part of this understanding about tithe as a duty and a responsibility. It's not a gift to God. It's His to begin with. Proverbs 3. A promise comes with it. Honor Him with your wealth and first fruits, and then your barns will be filled overflowing and your vats with new wine. Look what happens if you hoard. Dishonest money dwindles away. Whoever gathers money little by little makes it grow. There's again that principle of saving and investing. Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied. My two older brothers, one is an attorney, and one he had a number of degrees. He was in the financial field, and he managed money for people who had a lot of money and made a lot of money for them and for himself. These two brothers were in a competition to see who could make a six-figure salary, no bonus attached, first. They're 4 years apart. Well, it turns out, as you might expect, that the attorney did it first. Yes? So I don't get as much breathing sound? Okay. Okay. But he spent his money almost as fast as he made it. 2 houses, sailboat, 5 cars, 4 dogs. It went on and on and on. He had to rent a place to store his antique cars. Just that kind of thing. One time we were talking about it because I was going into ministry, and he said, well, you'll never be rich. I didn't expect to be as a pastor. He said, be happy, because you'll never have the worries that I have. He got out his wallet, and he had like 20 some credit cards. I said, that's crazy. He said, well, this is what comes with wealth. That's so upside down. Anyway, it's important to understand that money will never satisfy. So, you know what Jesus said, can't serve both God and money. This attorney, he started out studying for the priesthood, left the priesthood to go into the practice of law. Can't serve both. This is what comes with wealth. Don't store up for yourself treasures on earth. Store up for yourself treasures in heaven. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be. Simple, straightforward, clear. How can you argue with it? I've used this one in a number of ways. I've had people ask me, does this mean we don't have to take up an offering at church? You see, because it says, so that no offering, no collection will have to be made. Hey, we get rid of offerings. No. Let me explain what was going on. He had been there a year before, and he'd explained the need in Palestine, and he said, so I want you to prepare, because when I come back through, I'm going to take that with me back to Jerusalem. So this was the instruction of how they were to do that. They were to do their accounting weekly, set aside an amount at home, and then the deacons of the church were supposed to come around and collect that, and take it all to one place so that it wouldn't have to be a collection. Because he didn't know exactly how long. He didn't know how the travel and things like that. He didn't know exactly when he would be back. So he said, so that when I arrive, they won't have to be scrambling to get it. It will already be here ready to go. That's what's behind this verse, and many people misunderstand. And so I said, so if you want to get rid of doing collections during your worship service, you have to convince the deacons to come around to every member's home every week to collect their offerings. And the deacons always say, that's not happening. Having said that, a friend of mine was in ministry in another conference, and the church building they were in was old, and it was entirely hemmed in, and all they had was street parking. So they planted a new church in a new suburb. Many of the people in that were members of his congregation, went to other churches that were near, and they planted a whole new congregation in another part of town where there was no Adventist church. Started off with a very small group. They decided after he had been there about 10 years that they were going to stop taking up an offering. They were going to have a big glass bowl in the foyer where people would just put their money in. Like the temple story I told this morning. He just retired this past summer, 32 years in that same church. From the time that he planted it to his time of retirement, the church had grown from about 30 people to over 600. They had not only built a brand new church building, but they also built a retirement center with apartments for people in a continuum of care. There was no nursing care, but a continuum of lifestyle. So they went from independent living to assisted living, all in the same piece of property. They built a K through 8 school as well. And they did not take up offerings because everybody who came into the church was educated about the purpose of that bowl. And they were very faithful about returning their tithes and offerings that way. So it was never a part of their worship service. It can be done. There are ways to do it. One is to have the deacons go around and collect it. The other is to do like they did. But that was a conscientious decision on the part of that. And I should say that the pastor regularly spoke about stewardship in the congregation. So it was not unusual for them to get a sermon on stewardship. As ministerial director in 2 conferences, I asked the pastors how many of them preach about stewardship. Less than 25% of pastors regularly preach about stewardship. Then my follow-up question is, if you preach about stewardship, how often do you do it? Most of them said once a year. Now, if only 25% only speak about it once a year, you can see that that's not going to have a whole lot of long-term effect. I started off in a 4-church district, and I decided those folks needed to know about stewardship. So I planned a stewardship month. Yeah, month. 4 sermons in a row on stewardship. You know what I learned? By the 4th week, attendance was half. Be creative as you want, but there's only so much you can do when talking about stewardship. And honestly, people don't like to hear about it. That's the reality. Look at the size of the group here compared to who was here for worship. I changed up my program, and I still preach 4 sermons a year, every year as a pastor, about stewardship. I just sprinkled them throughout the year, and I never told them they were stewardship, never titled them that way. So that's an important part of this work, and I never thought I'd be a stewardship director for a conference. What else does it say? Keep your lives free from the love of money. Be content with what you have, because God said, "I never will I leave you or forsake you." And I like this First Timothy passage too. It says money's the root of all evil, doesn't it? It doesn't say that. It doesn't say money's the root of all evil. Our corrupt nature is the root of all evil. But it's the love of money that is the root of all evil. You see, when you love money, you don't have room to love God. And there's the problem. That's why Jesus said you can't serve two masters. You're going to love one and hate the other. That's what's being talked about here. People take that and they say money's the root of all evil. No, it's not. Are there corrupt rich people? Yes. Are there rich people who are not corrupt? Yeah. In fact, you know about John Wanamaker? Okay. Great department store guy in Philadelphia, not Topeka. But in spite of Wanamaker Boulevard being there, he lived on a tenth of what his store made. He took a tithe. He was a faithful tithe. And in fact, I believe it's Temple University in Philadelphia was founded by John Wanamaker from the profits of his store. He founded a Baptist seminary. It's no longer a Baptist school, but that was John Wanamaker's faith that started that. Yes, ma'am. Not only did he pay tithe, but he did the same thing as John Wanamaker. He kept cutting back his income and kept giving more away. The founder of Domino's Pizza. What? Yes, the founder of Domino's Pizza. He spent most of his profits that he made from his business with Domino's Pizza on building churches in lands around the world. He gave it to the church to build churches. He was a Catholic. They built Catholic churches, but whatever. In fact, at one point, he decided he was going to sell the business because he enjoyed going to different countries and building churches. And he was going to go do that with the rest of his life, sell the business and have that. And that's what he was going to do. And the bishop said, please don't sell your business. That's killing the goose that laid the golden egg. He eventually did, but that wasn't until he was 74 years old. But he went that year and built a church in another country. But again, you see, there are rich people who are not lovers of money. There's one particular that you might know from the scriptures. His name was Nicodemus. Ever heard of him? Anybody here buy spice? You buy spices? How do you buy spices? Little tiny. Like, what's that measure to? Okay, let's say that's 2 ounces. How much are 2 ounces of? How much is 2 ounces of cinnamon? It's about that much. In dollars? About that much. It's not cheap, right? How many ounces are in a pound? You didn't know this was going to be a math class. 16. Thank you. 16. Okay. At the price of cinnamon, 16 ounces would be how much in dollars? Sizable amount of money, right? And other spices are more. That's a relatively common and not too horribly expensive one. Try saffron. Forget about it. Okay? Even vanilla. Yeah, we saw some vanilla that it was a little bottle. Uh-huh. There you go. Now, the reason I tell all that is because Nicodemus showed up at Jesus' tomb with, why that much? Do you know? Good answer, but poor people got buried with a whole lot less. You know what the difference was? Was Jesus rich? No, he was in a borrowed tomb. The amount of spices and ointments that Nicodemus brought was the amount that the Sanhedrin had said would be used for the burial of the high priest. So Nicodemus was acknowledging Jesus, the true high priest. Isn't that beautiful? And in the book Acts of the Apostles, Ellen White says, it was Nicodemus's wealth that financed Paul and Silas on their missionary journey. Wow. He used his money to extend the gospel. Like Domino's Pizza building churches. See, that's the difference. So, where are we? Okay. Command them to do good, be rich in good deeds, be generous and willing to share so they may take hold of the life that truly is life. That's the point of all these teachings about finances and money. It is not, God doesn't entrust them to us so that we can have a lot on earth. He wants us to be using those things for the benefit of others, and by becoming selfless through that giving, we become more like the selfless one who gave himself so that we could have everything, the one who created everything. Okay, so this gets into, we get to your attitude about money. I got a couple of different handouts on this. 4 for that row. A taker or a maker. This is from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Scarcity mentality or an abundance mentality. The proposal at the bottom of the page is, you're not likely to change all 12 of them this week, but take 1 or 2 and start working on it, depending on where you're at. If you're in a scarcity mentality, you have a difficult time sharing recognition, credit, power, profit, and a hard time being happy for the success of other people. So what's your attitude toward money? Do you keep it as a defense, or do you use it because you have the abundance paradigm? You use it to break down poverty, etc. Do you see money as a way to escape loss, or is it a way to finance the vision, to pursue the vision? And that's where we see Nicodemus using his money to advance the gospel. Is it safety, or do you use it in a way that people would consider risky in order to maximize the benefit? Financial advisors will tell you that when you're young and you're just starting in your career, you can afford more risk. And so you can invest in ways that are riskier. You realize that with higher risk results in higher profit. And so you can afford that when you're young because you have time to make up for it. The older you get, the closer to retirement, when there's less likelihood of your being able to earn your way out of a big loss, you tend to retrench your investment strategy to safer, less risky ways of investing. That's on that side of it. But you see these paradigms. So you want to start working toward developing the abundance mentality. People generally view money in one of 4 ways: status, security, enjoyment, or control. It's interesting that most women see money as security, and most men see money as status and control. Now, those are generalizations. Since we're in a room full of women here, I've got to be careful. But what's fun to do with this, I have been a trainer for Prepare and Rich for about 20 years. And Prepare and Rich is a pre-marriage inventory that helps people prepare for the realities of marriage. And this is an exercise from it. And it's recommended that the couples who come to prepare for marriage go through this exercise and then share the results with their partner. And when you do, you'll find out what their attitude toward money is and what your attitude toward money is. And by knowing that, you're able to work out a happy arrangement and attitude about money that satisfies both of you. It turns into a win-win. If you've read anything about marriage and divorce in our country, you've heard that one of the major reasons for divorces is money. Well, this is one way to begin to address it, to understand where you're coming from with money, how you view it, and what you expect of it. We're nearing retirement. You might have heard me mention that this morning. My wife is concerned. She doesn't think we have enough money in our retirement funds. And I said, darling, we had more right now than I have ever expected to have. We're fine. Oh no, there's not enough. I said, well, how much would be enough? Well, if we had a full year of salary in our savings account. I said, we've never been anywhere near that. I am not working until we are. That's crazy. The conference, by policy, is required to have 90 days of operating capital on hand, which means that if every church in the conference did not turn in another penny for 90 days, the conference would be able to pay its bills for 90 days, pay all of the employees for 90 days, all of their medical bills for 90 days. That's a lot of money to have on hand. But the church only requires 3 months. So I said to her, if in their infinite wisdom, well, their limited human wisdom, they've decided that 90 days is enough for us to operate on safely, don't you think that that's an adequate savings for us to have for retirement? But I want more. That's that security paradigm. That's the way she sees money. I just have never been that way. So we have come to a happy medium. In the course of our marriage, back when we first got married, we made an agreement. Neither of us would spend $100 on anything without talking to the other one, and we would decide together if we could afford to spend that much money. Now, $100 isn't much money. I mean, that's a pair of sneakers today. So, still don't do it. We talk about it. But because of that, we have made decisions along the way that we don't have some stuff that we would have had otherwise. When our boys were in academy, they came to me and said, Dad, you really need to buy us a wave runner. I said, well, I really have no use for a wave runner. Why do I need to buy a wave? Well, so that we can take it to the lake and our friends and we can go and we can play on the lake. I said, there are 4 people in our church who have wave runners. Yeah. And they're all your friends. Yeah. Go to the lake with them. What's so hard about that? Well, what if they don't want to go and we want to go? Maybe you could borrow it. I doubt it, but or save up your money and go rent one. They have rentals. But I'm not going to buy something to sit in the garage for 9 months of the year, maybe be used for 3 months, and my car sit out in the weather. It's not going to happen. They were not happy with me. Still don't have one. Neither of them have them either as married adults. Hey, so it comes down to setting priorities and deciding what's valuable to you. So let's face it, money and possessions have power, which is why movie stars tell us their opinions about everything. But money and possessions are not evil. Okay? Money and possessions are tools to be used for God's kingdom. That's why we talked about Nicodemus. They are a blessing when we acknowledge the source. That is, when we're faithful in our stewardship of tithes and offerings. And how we use the money and possessions entrusted to us provides a window into our thoughts and emotions. My practice as a pastor was to tell my church treasurers, it is the right of the pastor to know what every member gives. Can go and look at the books and actually see what every member gives. Why? Because it's a window into thoughts and emotions. I would ask my treasurers in every church that I pastored For the first 6 months that I was there, I wanted to see every month the books. I would see every name, every amount given. Because I wanted to know how much they get? No, because I was learning a pattern. After that, I asked my treasurers to inform me if they noticed a sudden change in someone's giving, or over a period of time, an incremental change, positive or negative. Why? Because it's a window. It lets me see something. My responsibility as a pastor is to take care of people. They used to be called curates or cures. We curated people's souls, their spiritual health. Money is an indication of spiritual health. Is it a thermometer? Is it a barometer? I don't know, but I do know that if there is a sudden change, positive or negative, I better get to that person's house as the pastor and find out what's going on. Something has happened. If it's positive, hallelujah, we celebrate together. You know, Paul says, rejoice with those who rejoice. He also says, weep with those who weep. If it's to the negative, if something really bad has happened, my responsibility is to know that and help them through it. Do I solve their problems? Probably not. But sometimes just being there, hearing it, is all they really need. But it's my responsibility to know that, to be watching and taking care of that. Is it as the treasurer's responsibility? No. And that's very important. My brother, who was the financial manager, he was elected by his Catholic parish to be treasurer one year. He was elected because his two kids were in the Catholic high school, and he was fairly wealthy. And he ran in the circles of the more affluent members of the parish. And they knew that he had all the letters behind his name that said he was good with money. So they made him treasurer. He took it. After 2 years, he quit. He said, it made me so mad seeing how little those stingy, miserly, rich, and he started, I said, settle down, Charlie. Peacemaker in me. But I understand what his frustration was. Let me tell you about a little story about tithe here. When we were children, our parish was established in a new suburb, and it was a brand new congregation, and we were given an old priest. And so a convent was built, and a Catholic school was built, and the basement of what would be a church building was put in place. 18 years later, we were still worshiping in the basement. Finally, the old priest retired. He was almost 80. So you can tell he was not young when he started this new congregation. The only reason he did it was because the bishop said he had to. We had 3 festivals a year. We had the Women's Altar Society, which had raffles spring and fall. We had Las Vegas nights 3 times a year. That's where they bring in a gambling machine and they'd have gambling all over the church. I mean, everything was designed to raise money to build the church. But you see, running a school is not cheap. So, well, somehow that money always ended up running the school, paying for the nuns. And boy, that priest had a nice rectory and a nice car every year. I never understood that. Anyway, he retired. Bishop sends us a new priest right out of seminary. He shows up, he goes over the book, sits with the parish council. One Sunday morning, he gets up and he says, there will be no more festivals. There will be no more raffles. There will be no more Las Vegas nights. You could have heard a pin drop in that church. Now, Catholic churches are known for quietness as it is. This was shock. People were thinking, well, where will we go to gamble? No bingo. Anyway, he said, the prophet Malachi says, you've robbed me in tithes and offerings. Dun, 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 dun. I never heard that verse before from the scriptures. And then he says, so I will be visiting every family in this parish, and I will tell you what your tithe is. Well, this is back when they still liked priests. I'm old. He showed up at our house. He had this big, it looked like an LE's bookcase, those big square cases, okay? And then it was packed full of little boxes. These little boxes were envelopes, and each box of envelopes, every envelope in the box there were 52 envelopes to a box. They all had the same number on them. That was how they kept anonymity. And so he said, Don, bring me your paycheck. And they sat down at the table, and they figured out what their tithe would be. And he wrote in his book, Don Sweigart, envelope number 532, this amount. And he said, here's your box of envelopes. I expect to see this amount in that envelope every week in the basket at the church. And then he said, any of your kids have jobs? Does your wife work? And my dad, good man. Oh, she works like... He used words that were acceptable in that society. And then, but she doesn't get paid for it. Worked like a devil. He used more colorful language. She had 7 kids. She did work. She just didn't get paid for it. But my boys, they all have paper routes, and the oldest daughter works at the grocery. Line them up, bring them through. And we all got a box of envelopes, and we're told how much our tithe was. They expected to see it, and he would be checking. That's how we learned about tithe. I knew that before I was an Adventist. My brother, who's the financial manager, has always been faithful in tithe. My oldest brother, who studied for the priesthood and then became an attorney, hated it and resented having his money taken from him and was never faithful in tithe and offering. My dad was the rest of his life. He became a Sabbath keeper when he was old. That's a whole nother story. But my brother, the financial manager, and I commiserate about the joy of tithe and what a blessing it has been to us. We are retiring debt-free. We have no debts of any kind. Homes paid off, cars are paid off. The last 2 cars we bought cash because we had kept our cars so long that we had saved up enough money that we were able to buy them that way. That takes discipline. But it's no different than what this is saying. In some of my churches, my wife and I were the major contributors for those congregations. We did not have the biggest income, but we were the biggest givers because we've always been faithful in tithes and offerings. Our boys went through Adventist elementary school, Adventist academies, and Adventist colleges. They came out with no debt. How did they do that? Faithfulness in these regards, working hard, saving, investing, and taking care of what they had. So the next slide is that what money means to you. So that will be fun for you to take and do with whoever's your other money partner in your house, and you'll be able to compare, whoa, that got all jibby-jawed around on this display. But you can see how to score it, and you can find out what it is, and you'll enjoy doing that with, look at that, did too. Okay, the important thing about this is that you notice the median household income for the U.S. and the median or per capita income. You see those. Well, these states are not poor, but those are per capita numbers. But then when you look at credit card debt, here's where it becomes an issue. Look at this debt, $5,331 per credit card holder. Per household, $5,900. But people who have a card that they pay off every month, they still will run up a balance in a month of $1,154. I happen to fit in that category because I have found that cash, well, I don't know where it goes. So to prevent my inability to control my cash, I use a credit card because I won't pull it out for just anything. I will not buy a cup of coffee with a credit card. That just rankles me. I will fill up my gas tank with the credit card. So those are the kinds of things that we're talking about here. 77% of Americans have at least one credit card. I have 3. My wife has 3 separate. So we, between us, have 6. Both of us, they are paid off every month. I have one card that I only use for one bill a year. It's the only way it stays active. But I also know where that money is, what it's doing, that's one. Every year they try to get me to take out more debt. They want to raise it. They want to raise my spending limit and all that. Every card. Something interesting happened. I looked at my FICO score this month, your credit card score and how you're doing in terms of, are you a good risk for debt? I am not as good of a debt risk as I was before I paid off both cars and my house. In other words, because I don't have a regular payment to make, they think I am not creditworthy. I have more money than ever.
My husband doesn't believe he doesn't have a credit card, never has. He doesn't believe in putting anything on credit. So one time we did get a car on credit for his benefit because his credit score was 0.
Yeah.
I had to co-sign for it.
Yeah, and that's embarrassing. Yeah. Yes, and that's real. In our economic society, that's the value of having one credit card and paying it off every month. Yes, ma'am?
I have one credit card, only because when I saved the money to go to New Zealand to visit my grandson, kids thought I ought to have a credit card.
Well, and there are a lot of values in a credit card. One time I had a car blow up on a cross-country trip, and without a credit card, I was sunk. I couldn't rent a car. They wouldn't take cash. So what was I going to do? I had to call my brother to come help because he had one. So there are reasons to have them. That means learn to use it well and properly.
My first husband, he's passed away now. He was in Chicago, and he went to get a cab, and they wouldn't take cash.
Mm-hmm.
He had to have a credit card.
Yeah.
He had no cash.
Yeah.
He had no credit card.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, and there are stores now that will not take cash. We are moving away from a cash society. There are places for cash, there's places for credit. I will say this, I do not have or use a debit card. Very simple reason. Debit card has immediate access to your bank account. So I won't use one. We had a church in one of our states here in the conference who called me and asked could fix a problem. I said, I don't know. What is the problem? Well, somebody got our debit card and emptied out our bank account, and they took all the church's tithe and offering. We have no money. We can't pay our utilities. I said, I'm sorry, I cannot help you. Have you talked to your bank? Yes. What'd they say? They said they can't help me either. There's no insurance on a debit card. The money's gone. I said, why did you have a debit card? Well, they gave it to us when we opened the account at that bank. I said, yeah, most banks do that. And you used it? Yes. I bought something for the church with it. I said, vendor had access to your bank account. I don't know who at that vendor, whoever it was that you bought, whatever it was, drained your account. All you can do is report it to the FBI. They will look into it as a case of bank fraud. Somebody illegally accessed your account. But you know what happens with a debit card? It isn't illegal. They did not illegally. They had the number. That means they have the right to access the account. That's why debit cards are so dangerous. Yes.
There's a lot of fraud going on right now.
Yes.
Two of them call Social Security.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter-in-law worked for Social Security Department.
Mm-hmm.
Don't say anything.
Right. Right.
It's a fraud.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
They even ask scammers.
Yep.
They ask about, said, last one was, have a problem with your Social Security number. Well, it's,
Yep. Yep. Just tell us what it is, and we'll tell you whether you're right or not. No, that ain't happening. You're right.
just don't say anything.
That's
Just
right.
hang up.
That's right. That's right. So let's look at more credit card debt issues. 59% of those making less than $40,000 have at least one card. 93% of those making $100,000 or more have more than one card. Americans carry an average of 3.4. I said I carry 3 and my wife carries 3. So we're below average. I'm short too. 42% of Americans are able to pay their credit card balance in full each month. Of those that carry a balance, only 40% pay more than the minimum. What? That's a recipe for disaster. Remember that? Get out of debt as quick as possible. This is only getting deeper in debt. 8% owe more than $10,000 on their credit cards. Only 15% owe less than $1,000. This is a mess. But this is where Americans are with debt. Hoping that you are not in that percentage, look at this. 43% of U.S. households would not be able to pay their bills if they went a month without a paycheck. Remember what my wife wanted, a year of money in the bank? I said 90 days should be plenty. That's obviously more than 30, okay? But 43% of households in the U.S. could not do that. Look at the rest of those numbers. 26%, they never set aside savings in an interest-bearing account. Now, granted, interest rates are terrible on the passbook savings accounts. On the other hand, stuffing your money in a mattress guarantees you 0 interest. So, keeping your money in a coffee can at home is not a good solution. Use the financial institutions, save. And you should save something from every check. 24% have less than $250 left in the bank at the end of the month. Obviously, not enough to go 30 days without, right? A paycheck. 10% said they have less than $50 to spend between paychecks. Now, you've heard of Warren Buffett, right? Bought his first stock when he was 11. 99% of his wealth he earned after his 50th birthday. Wise investing. And compound interest. He says that my wealth has come from a combination of living in America, lucky genes, and compound interest. It's incredible. When I first began to work for the church as a pastor, back in the dark ages, I looked at the church had a retirement fund that was called a DB plan, a defined benefit plan, a standard retirement plan that was common across American industry that caused the big 3 automakers to go bankrupt because they couldn't pay. Most union jobs have the same kind of benefit plan. So do cities, municipalities, many of which are going bankrupt these days because they can't pay the benefits they promised to pay because they didn't put enough money aside to pay them. Well, the church was in the same position, and so the church benefit plan was changed. Retirement benefit plan was changed in the year 2000 from a defined benefit plan to a defined contribution plan. So every month, the conference puts in so much money for each employee, and we get to put in money, and that's our money for our retirement. Under the DB plan, we don't have any say over it. Certain benefits are promised to us for so much work. Once we reach retirement age, that's a DB plan. The problem is the church also did not put enough money aside to pay those benefits. So this year, Kansas-Nebraska Conference had to take 11.5% of the tithe that it received and send it to the retirement office to pay retired employees their monthly defined benefit payment, because the money was not put aside like it should have been back when those people were working. It's the same problem Social Security has. The money has been taken and used for other purposes, and so it's not available to pay the people who were promised these benefits. That's why when I started working for the church, I looked at the plan and said, this won't work. My brother, who was the financial manager, he and I shared an apartment while we were in college. I read the Wall Street Journal. I was up on all this financial information, and he was very helpful. And when I looked at that plan, I said, oh man, this is what's making everybody go bankrupt. The church is going to be bankrupt too. So I started a special savings on the side with as little as pastors make. It took me 12 years to get back to the level of pay that I had when I left Blue Cross to go to work for the church. So 12 years behind. That doesn't count how much further they had gotten ahead in 12 years. It's just I finally got back to that level of pay after 12 years in the church. You can tell we're not overpaid. Be that as it may, I put aside money. And now, people who started to work in the same month as I did, I am processing retirement benefits for them, and I ask them, did you, when you started, do this? No. Oh, I'm sorry. This is all you've got coming. Because I know that because I did that, I have a pile of cash on the side that has received compound interest over 35 years that is rolling right into my retirement account because I knew it. By the way, I have not kept this a secret. I have told every pastor I have worked with, more than 300 different pastors, you need to do this. Most of them don't. That's the reality. They can't afford it because they have gotten themselves in debt. We'll talk about how to get out of debt, but that's why it's so important to take part in a retirement plan and have a good budget. Remember we said avoid debt and have a budget? Did I hand it out? No, I didn't. I will give you a budget worksheet. One of these stacks of papers. Here it is. This little piece of paper has helped more people than you can imagine. Oh, I'll just let you do it. At the top, it has 2 lines for monthly income because most households have at least 2 incomes. Headlines, put as many on there as you want. All of these expenses that I have listed are, I don't think I missed anything. I may have. But I tried to cover everything, even to the point of food at home, food away. Plan for it. You see, being on a budget doesn't mean you can never go out to eat. You should have insurance. You should plan and save. Notice both savings and retirement savings. Gifts. Plan on having gifts. Plan on giving gifts away. Entertainment. You notice there's a category, entertainment. Then there's 2 more, satellite and internet. That's all part of that. Personal care. You can add a lot in there. Clothing, cleaning supplies, all that stuff is in here. Hobbies. And then you total that up and you know if you're spending more than you're earning or not. And as I said before, there's only 2 solutions, either increase the income or decrease the outgo. It's the only way to balance a budget. Using this, I had a situation in one church where we had a family who came every month with a different bill they wanted paid by the church. After 3 years, I said to the church board, we have to do something different. How do you want to address this? Remember that principle, don't expect others, parents, community, government, church to support you? these folks were living on the church. They were living beyond their means and expecting the church to pay their bills. And then the board commissioned me to go and meet with them and help them understand their financial situation. So we did this. Got their income, got all their debts, what they expected to spend, what they had been spending, put it all down. And I said, okay, we've got a problem here because you're spending more than you're making. Can you get another job, either of you? No. 2 kids at home? Perfectly reasonable. If you can't increase the income, how do we expenses? So we went through and we talked about where they could adjust their spending so that they would be able to live with it. We ended up that they had $25 extra a month. Now that's a pittance. But remember, they were having the church pay their bills, but they could have been living and having $25 a month for savings. And the husband said, we can do this. I said, well, that's great. That's great. And she says, I can't live like this. I said, wait a minute. You just sat here with me and you said, yeah, we could probably, and now you're saying we can't? Well, I can't. I can't live like that. That's living like a pauper. I said, no, it's living within your means. And eventually you save that money up and you won't be a pauper. But you're right now, your income with 2 kids, the reality is it's going to be tight. Welcome to the real world. Welcome to being an adult. And she said, nope, not going to do it. I said, well, then I have to drop the other shoe. This all wasn't a social visit. See, the boards told me that if they'd give you 3 months to live according to a budget once we worked this out. And after that, they won't pay any more bills. They've been paying your bills for 3 years and they won't do it anymore. But they give you 3 months to get it together. So, grace, but there's a deadline. 3 months, they submitted bills, then they moved their membership. 6 months later, the pastor called me where they had moved to. What did you send me? I said, I didn't send you anything. You took something, though. And I told him what we had been through. He said, I guess I have to go have the same conversation. I said, don't go without your board knowing. It's not easy to change people's attitudes or behaviors. It's a real challenge. You should have something at the bottom of your budget worksheet that talks about SMART goals, yes. And financial plans, we'll talk about those too. But SMART goals, another handout. Need more paper. Everybody needs more paper. Trees are a renewable resource. Great state of South Carolina grows more paper trees than any other state. They're grown as a cash crop to make paper. Anyway, it explains what SMART goals are and how to go about doing that. And as you make those plans, for instance, if you have student debt, you may want to decide how to get out of that student debt, and that might be your short-term goal. Long-term goal may be, like ours was, to have everything paid off for a full year before we retired. So we have a full year of income with no debt before we go into retirement. So we were able to accomplish that. We built those goals. They were specific. They were clear. They were defined. We knew what they were. We knew what had to do. They were measurable. So we knew how we were progressing, how close we were getting. They were attainable. That is, they were practical. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have a pie-in-the-sky goal. Sometimes you have to shoot for the stars, because if you shoot for the stars and only hit the moon, hey, you got 250,000 miles higher than most anybody else, okay? So attainable, that's a sort of fluid term. But it's important that you understand that if all of your goals are impractical and unable to be achieved, all it does is feed frustration. Don't do that. They have to be relevant. That means they apply to where you are and where you expect to be in the not too distant future. The amazing thing about humanity is we always think the future is going to be better than it ever turns out to be. We are eternal optimists or great fools. I'm not sure which. But the reality is you have to be relevant, and you have to make sure of these other pieces are in place so that it can be done in a timely way, within or by a clearly defined set target date. Those are smart goals. When you do that in your financial world, you will end up where you will not have any worries when that income ends in retirement, which is what most people are most worried about. It's interesting that my brother, who's the attorney, he's retired, but he stayed on retainer with the firm so that he could continue to have income because he didn't put enough away. He spent it. He had to sell 2 houses and all but 2 cars. Gee, such a suffering. I'm sorry, that's not very nice to my brother. My other brother, the financial guy, he's in Fat City. He's got no worries in the world. He told me, if you don't have $1 million in the bank when you retire, you're not going to enjoy retirement. I said, I don't live like you live. His standard of living is substantially above ours, but we're used to ours. And that's the difference. Remember that be content? That was one of those early principles. Okay. We don't have to have the things that, I don't need to drive a Lexus. My Toyota's just fine, thank you. But so those are the kinds of things that we're talking about, okay? Now let's say you have had the misfortune. Wait a minute, there's one more thing. You ever wonder about millionaires? You know, there's a lot of people on the campaign trail who are saying that deserve it, they shouldn't have it, they ought to give it all to the government. They were just lucky in the lottery of life. Remember what Warren Buffett said? Lucky genes. Living in America in compound interest, smart investing. He was careful with his money. But most people will tell you lies about millionaires, particularly politicians. Careful research has debunked the typical myths about millionaires. They didn't earn their money. They don't deserve it. That's a myth. They take big risks with their money. That's a myth. They have an advantage in education and careers. That's a myth. They do not. Look at what it says. This is from a study of 10,000 millionaires. And this book was published this year. They take personal responsibilities for their ideas, their spending. They own their mistakes. They change their course financially when needed. They take advice. They use financial planners. These are millionaires. The people that we think don't need any of this. Yeah, they do. Practice intentionality, not spontaneity. Remember the $100 deal I made with my wife? That's what's being talked about there. Intentionality, not spontaneity. Oh, that's so neat. Look at that good price. It's on sale. I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble because I didn't talk with my wife, and I spent more than $100 in our agreement. So now I'm doubly in trouble with my wife, and I don't have the money, and I've got this stupid thing, which I'll have to run a storage locker to. No. That's what it's being talked about. And now look at this. I love it. They live on less than they make. They use coupons. So the next time you see somebody using coupons, don't assume it's because they're broke. They could be a millionaire. They drive older cars. There was a similar study that was done in 2006. And it said that the millionaires in this country who were included in that study, their favorite car, what their preferred vehicle was, a F-150, bought used. Why? So many of them have been produced, they're cheap. So many have been produced. They've worked out the bugs. They're very reliable vehicles. And they will run for a long time after you've paid for them. And you can save all the money that you would have spent on car payments for the next vehicle. And so an F-150 is the preferred vehicle of the millionaire class. Everybody thinks, oh, it's a Bentley, oh, it's a Jaguar, oh, it's a BMW. No, it's an F-150. Somebody said at one of these seminars, Ford said, Chevys are better. I said, I'm glad you like the Silverado. But, Well, but for the price, you can buy two F-150s for the price of the Honda. Ouch. See why millionaires prefer an F-150? It keeps that money in their pocket. You may be right about the Honda. The question is, will I spend my money for that versus will I have money in my pocket to spend when I need it? Those are decisions that everybody gets to make. One of the nice things about living in our country is we have so many choices. We get to decide how we spend our money. It's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. I don't take anything away from any of those vehicles that are good or better than the others. But I love this. They're hard workers. They wake up early, enjoy their jobs, exercise regularly, stay married. One of the biggest reasons for financial failure is divorce. And when half of marriages fail, you wonder that people are in the state we talked about with all that consumer debt we were talking about earlier. That's part of the reason. One study that I read said that women who are divorced generally take 7 to 10 years to get back to the financial position they were in when they got divorced. That's like me going to seminary and having to wait 12 years to get back to. Okay? That's terrible. That's painful. Men, it takes about 5. So men get there sooner, but they're still having a 5-year slog to get back to where they were because of divorce. Divorce is financially, economically, a wreck for both parties. Emotionally, there's a whole nother. And they take advantage of their company retirement plan. I told you about how I took care of ours. Yeah, it's really important. We put aside the maximum amount that we can to get the full match from the conference. The conference puts in 5% of my salary every month into my own 403B, 401k, whatever you want to call it. 5%. Then they will match 3% if I will put 3%. So if I put 1%, they'll put 1. So now I'm at 7, right? My 1, their 1, and my 5 base. 7. And you just 9, 10, 11. If I put in my 3 and they put in their 3, they're putting in 8 and I'm putting in 3 and I'm at 11% now. It used to be said by financial planners that if you put away 11% of your monthly income for your retirement in a Keogh, a Roth, a 403, 401, you'll be okay when you reach retirement age. They've changed that recently. In the last 3 years, they've said, you know what, 15% is more likely. Okay? I was at 15% 5 years ago because I knew how soon I would be retiring. So when I hit 60, I pushed up my contribution to retirement. If you've got a retirement plan, use it. If your employer provides it, take advantage of it. Now, the next step is you want to get out of debt. You got debt? You want to get out of debt. How do you do it? Ever heard Dave Ramsey? I'm debt free. He has people come on his radio show and shout. And here's the method he recommends for getting out of debt. Now, this is slightly different than Dave Ramsey's version. His idea is you pay off the highest interest ones first. Mine is you pay off the smallest amounts owed first. Why? Because that way you get a reward. I don't have that bill anymore. Right? Happy feet. Celebrate. My discipline is paid off. I'm out of that debt. And you'll notice that the debt payment is 10% of your monthly income. So this couple has a debt of $7,675. They have an income of $4,600 a month, so $460 a month that they apply to these bills. Add up the columns, they all come to $460, and you can see how in 3 months they pay off the first bill. In 9 months, they've paid off the first 2 bills, and they apply that money to the others so that the payments keep, and you're staying at $460, and by the end of the year, you have paid off $7,675 in 1 year, just spending $460 a month. Pretty amazing, isn't it? So it's doable. You can plug in your own numbers into this kind of a chart and come out with the same kind of results. The 10% is the important thing. Figure out what your debts are, what the payments are. You have to pay the minimum payment on any single bill. But when you have the extra money, you then apply it to the less bills so that they are paid off. And that's what you want to do. Obviously, these last 2, the doctor and the auto, they're not paid off at the end of this year. Because if you just add those up, 12 times 8 is how much? Who can do math? 9,600? Right? 8 times 12. Right? $80 times 12. $960. So of the $1,700 they owed, they paid $960 at the end of the year. Okay? So they're way ahead on that loan. And that's the important point. They're paying the minimum, but they're getting it paid off, and they're down over half just using this method. So you see how that works out. You can figure out how to get out of debt yourself. It works for any size debt. You can do it. Okay. Continue until debt-free. Okay. That explains it all. So what does the Bible say about tithes and offerings? Now we're getting into how does it work with the church?
Excuse myself, we have a cantata chapel tonight.
La.
Even 10 minutes.
Well, I'll tell you what. You've got all these. You've got all these slides, so you have them. So the first, second, and third tithe, I don't know which number it is. It looks like slide 22. To promote the assembling of the people for religious service as well as provide for the poor, a second tithe of the increase was required. The first tithe was to pay for the Levites. The second tithe they were to use for their travel money for the feast. And the third tithe was for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. So that's the 3 tithes under the old Israelite system. Every third year, the second tithe was to be used at home to entertain the Levite and the poor and provide a fund for charity and hospitality. There wasn't a welfare system. The temple and the tithe were the welfare system. So she says, let God's people be faithful in paying tithe. However small, the Lord will recognize the self-sacrifice. You can read about all these. It says that if everybody would give a tenth of the increase, there'd be an abundance to carry forward God's work. There are 12,000 members of the Kansas-Nebraska Conference. Any given Sabbath, about 6,000 of us are in church. Of those 6,000, roughly 3,000 of them return tithes. Of 3,000 people, half of them give offerings. That's 1,500 people who are supporting the local churches. Now, obviously, some are giving a lot. Some are giving not so much. But when you read this, last year we had a little over $12 million in tithe given to the conference. We only keep a portion of, see that on one of the slides, we keep 71 cents out of every dollar of tithe that is given. And we use it, and it tells you how it is used and what it's used for. Imagine if instead of 3,000 of our 6,000 attending, if all 6,000 of the people who attend every week were faithful in returning tithe, like it says, even the children, parents and children, if everybody was faithful in returning tithe, there would be more than enough. This year when we voted our budget at this most recent executive committee meeting. We voted it based on 100% of the 2019 tithe used for 2020. And we spend every penny we receive, but we spend it according to those divisions that are outlined there. But at that level, because costs keep going up, even if tithe doesn't, that means even if tithe stays flat, we have that much less money to spend. On average, tithe needs to increase by 2.5% a year in order for us to tread water, to stay flat, okay, in terms of expenses and paying the bills of the conference. So if tithe is less than 2.5% in a year, we're in a deficit budget. That's the reality of the conference. We have reduced the number of people in the office to put more employees in the field because we believe it's more important to have pastors and teachers than it is to have office workers. Now, it doesn't mean that we're not doing ministry in the office. It just means that we think that it's more important to have the people in the field doing that work. And that's the way that we have allocated tithe in the conference. On slide 25, tithe is dedicated to supply the needs of those in ministries, pastors, teachers, administrators, evangelists. The conference is the storehouse, and that's explained in those tithe slides about how much we receive and where it goes. And notice the bottom line, the individual believers under no compulsion to give, and I mentioned that this morning. It is so important. It works well, but it depends on willing people to return their tithes and give offerings. The Seventh-day Adventist Church has a unique system, but it saves us the required working other jobs. A lot of pastors in other churches, they have a job and they pastor. Our pastors don't have to do that. How did we get here? Back in 1844 to 1856, we didn't have a system. Then we came up with systematic benevolence because preachers weren't getting enough to live on. One pastor, Jan Loughborough, quit preaching because he couldn't run his farm and preach. One year he went on a preaching circuit and he came home after 9 months with 2 chickens. His wife and children had to run the farm that year, so he stayed home the next because they barely survived, and he would not leave his wife and children with that responsibility. It was his responsibility to provide, but the church was not paying him. 2 chickens. That's pitiful. So they started Sister Betsy. Beautiful system. The deacons collected the money and sent it to the Review and Herald. Notice, this is in 1859. The church wasn't formed till 1863. So where did it go? It went to the Review and Herald, which was owned lock, stock, and barrel by James White, which is why James White died of strokes, because all of the pressure of supporting all of the church was on his shoulders. And when he tried to give the Review and Herald to the church, they wondered what the hook was. He killed himself working for the church. 1873, another financial panic hit, and they figured out Sister Betsy won't make it work. So what'd they do? Took 3 years of study. Church is slow. And they figured out, oh, look at this. God's been saying it since Malachi. Tithe. 1880s, Adventists almost everywhere adopted the full tithing plan. Now, if you're from Arkansas, I'm sorry, but I have to say something. Arkansas did not accept it until 1950. The Arkansas Conference did not promote tithing until 1950. Notice it finally had become a baptismal vow by then. That's how long the church has been working on this system and where it's brought us to. So in the 80s, because of tithe going up, mission offering went down. That's another problem. This is how members figure it, on tithe or on gross. Their tithe is either on gross or net, double tithe or triple tithe or whatever. 50% of members regularly attend, 50% of attendees regularly return tithe. Those numbers I was giving you, 6, 3, 1,500, 50% of tithers regularly give other offerings. That's where those numbers come from. That's the reality. But remember, if everybody was faithful in returning their tithes and offerings, there would be more than enough to do the work. I'm amazed how much ministry gets done on what we do get. So the conference tithe dollar, we keep 71 cents of every dollar. Union College gets 4 cents. The Union gets 9 cents. The North American Division and the GC gets 16%. And understand, all of this is for ministry. It isn't buying buildings. It isn't piling up gold in a mountain in Utah, which somebody told me recently. Their brother-in-law had told them, you don't need to give to the Adventist church. They've got a mountain of gold in Utah. I said, wow, tell them to find out where that mountain is and tell me where it is, because I'm sure the folks in Utah would love to know. Uh-oh. Okay, tithe usage within the conference. Office uses that percent. You see it on your slide. Ministries get 4%, youth gets 6%, education gets 12%, and the rest goes to pastors and churches, 68%. And you can see the breakdown, so you can see it on. Online giving, you all have online giving here. The amazing thing to me is that we started doing this a year ago, online giving, and the amount of tithe increase that it has caused. A couple of years ago,
It's really good.
it is really good. It's a good app. It's a good program. Well,
Makes it so easy.
it really
Best
does.
thing you guys have ever done.
And you know, your church gets credit for it because pastors are allocated by the amount of tithe the churches produce. Now, that's only one factor, but that's why it's important that that system is set up to acknowledge the local church. And you can give to your local church through it. And the church treasurer gets the check. And you get the credit. I mean, it's great. It is a really good thing. But what we were finding was that if the churches were closed because of a winter storm, or people didn't come because it was summer and they went on vacation, that money was gone. It never came in. They didn't save it up at home and then give it when they came back to church. Ow, that hurts. So what happens here is people get their paycheck, they go online and give. There's less lost tithe and offering through Adventist online giving. If you don't have it or don't use it, look into it. I think you'll find that it's extremely valuable. And it works really well. And so it says, you can give easily and quickly through Adventist giving. Any old time, no matter where you are, business trip, vacation, or just unable to attend church because of a terrible winter storm in Lincoln. 17% of the conference's income comes in the month of December. So you can see why winter storms can be particularly devastating to the budget. That's the end, unless you've got questions. I've got just a couple more things that are just fun. These are stories about giving. So this is a storybook. That's the first one. You all should have received in the mail. You got that? Okay. The personal giving plan and a letter? You didn't? Oh, no. I don't know how you got missed. I'll give you that booklet. Don't have any copies of the letters. And for those who don't know, here is a little explanation of tithe envelope and giving. Okay. And there already is. Yeah, I caused it. We could leave these for whoever afterwards that, want to pick those up when they're here and they ask questions. The church can say, oh, here, this explains it all. And 7 great facts about, are there any of these loose? Doesn't look like it. Nope. Open a package. I can't open it. I'm old and weak. Keep talking that way, it'll only get worse. Thank you all for staying by. I tried to get through that as quick as I could.
No, none of this is on you. We just weren't quite prepared.
I understand. That's fine.
Thank you for this is just all really good information. So
Last time I was at Chapel Oak, they gave
Oh, really? Well, good for them.
Pay out of debt and all that.
Well, good. Do you know where the most generous Christians live? Oh, I wish this was true. Believe it or not, it is North Platte, Nebraska. What? Barna? They were the ones who... You know about the the canteens at the train station during the Second World War? The ladies in North Platte met every troop train that came through North Platte, and they fed them, and they had dances, and it was incredible, giving them pies and just all kinds. It is a great story. Look up the history of that. But that reflects on their generosity, and it shows it has had effect to this day. It's really neat. There's a good museum in North Platte of it.
I was a young teenager. I lived in Topeka,
Yeah?
working there, and I went to church. The school was right behind the church.
Yeah. Downtown, the old place. Yeah. Do you all know the book that What Would Jesus Do came out of? David Shelton was the author. Charles Shelton. Thank you. He was the pastor of the Congregational Church in Topeka. And that's why there's a railroad, Topeka, Atchison, and Santa Fe. And you go through the newspaper, all the social life. It is a great book. If you haven't read it, get the book and read it. Wasn't it In His Steps? Yes, In His Steps is the name of the book. If you can find it, get it, read it. It is a great book about asking the question of, in this situation, what would Jesus do? What should I do as a representative of Jesus here? And it was written by the congregational pastor, and he wrote it as a serial for the Topeka Journal. And that was originally run as a serial back in the 1890s. Yep. In 1891, they ran a special train down to Ottawa for the camp meeting Ellen White spoke at in Ottawa. And they recorded her sermons and printed them in the paper. A reporter went down on the morning train, would stenographically record it, get the train back, print it overnight, and it was in the next day's paper. Amazing. They used to do that a lot. They don't do that so much anymore. Who wants to read a sermon? I'm sorry, that was not nice. I'm a preacher. I told you I'd put people to sleep. Thank you for staying awake. Let's pray. Gracious Father, thank you for the good attitude. Thank you for the opportunity to share this information. Lord,